Commander Jim Clark, retired US Navy. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you.
It was a great thrill to meet you recently. I wish that sometimes you don't meet people at funerals for the first time, but that's where we met. How many members of the Clark family were there when you were growing up? For those that don't know, that you are Doug Clark's brother, one of his many siblings. How many people were in the Clark household, and where did you grow up, Jim?
There's 8, grew up in Sioux Falls. I was kind of in the middle of the family. Douglas was the youngest, and I call him Douglas, and there's a story behind that too. I understand there's kind of a discrepancy about what his name is, Doug or Dougie or...
He hates that. He used to hate being called, didn't he? He used to hate... Hello, Auntie Diane. Nice to see you there, by the way. I thought she's hiding in the background. So you called him Douglas.
Douglas, yeah. And that's when I was nice, being nice. But my mother, when somebody would come over to the house and say, could Dougie come out and play? She says, I call him Douglas. And she'd go in and get the birth certificate and bring it out and say, his name is Douglas.
She'd bring the birth certificate out?
And the same thing, she kept all the birth certificates in her cedar chest, and they're all stacked there in a row. And my name was James. Everybody called me Jim. I calls him James, not Jim. So everybody understood that's the rules in the neighborhood.
How many Clark kids were there?
6.
Tell me who they were.
Fanny was our oldest.
Yep.
Anne, then Jesse, and myself, then Sandra, and then Douglas was the youngest. All the 4 kids were born at home.
Okay.
Douglas and Sandra were born in the hospital. Only kid born in the hospital.
You said that by the time Doug got there, because he was the baby of the family, that he got all the cute stuff, right?
Well, he's the only one that got daycare. The rest of us, given a bag of rocks to go play with. That's how it went. He got all the good stuff.
And he was more like Jesse. Was that what you were saying to me?
Yeah, as far as character and personality, he was more of a showman. Jesse was the kind of guy, he'd embarrass the whole family in that, he'd get up in front of the class and, belt out a song like Old Black Joe. And I refused to even participate in singing, because most of the songs back then were by Stephen Foster that referenced black people and the darkies or whatever back in the day. And so I didn't participate. And that turned into an embarrassment. It was a friend of Diane's sister down in Omaha, Nebraska. And we had been, gone for 20 some years. We came back and this lady says, Jim Clark, I recognize that name. And she was the teacher that used to teach in Sioux Falls.
Yep.
When I was in 2nd grade, 1st grade. So she goes home and she kept all her records, went through all the records, pulled out mine that says, Jim Clark does not participate. And I refused to sing in class, so that's what followed me.
So she remembered you because you refused to sing.
Right.
Wow. So what was like growing up in Sioux Falls? Because Sioux Falls is a black and a white city, correct?
Yeah, it is, but there weren't that many blacks. I think there were total when I left here. In 69, there was probably 200 blacks in all of Sioux Falls.
Really?
And that was it. So, in fact, I kind of looking back on things now and reflect back that you were treated almost as royalty, in high school and
really?
Association, because you were a little bit different, almost treated like royalty and were accepted. But, what was ingrained in us by mainly our mother was a work ethic, that you earned your position by, what you produced and how much how much value you created to whoever you were working for. So all the kids were that way, kind of brought up that way. And I remember it, kind of getting off the beaten path, but I used to just cross it when I was 5 years old. I used to empty waste paper basket at a little factory across the street, for 5 cents for a small one and 10 cents for a large one. And every morning I'd go over there. I'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, sit on the front porch waiting for them to open. And so I started working then I went to produce house out 3 miles away by the airport. Walked out there, took my bike, and would load a truck, 750 cases of eggs, 50 pounds a piece, by myself. And I got $1 for, it would take me probably 6 hours, $1. And I was pretty proud of myself. I did this all. I said normally it takes 4 people.
How old were you then?
13.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's kind of how life. But you know, this is about Douglas, so I'm sitting here talking right
No,
now
but
about
I
myself,
love hearing
but,
this. This is about you as well.
Yeah, but that's what kind of instilled Douglas too. It didn't take as much with him as it did the rest of us, but that's where it came from.
$1 would have been a pretty reasonable amount of money to a 13-year-old kid at that time, right?
Well, you know, I knew that I was being used and abused, but I knew, you know, when I got to high school, I was the strongest kid, had the strongest arms on the football team, so it paid off in the long run. So.
Was it competitive in your house, like, you know, for sport and things like that amongst you and your brothers and sisters?
No. As a matter of fact, I saw very little of them because I was always gone. You know, I had a job, you know, washing airplanes, and so I cashed that in on taking flying lessons for, you know, cleaning up airplanes. And I was always working and gone, and didn't have time for baseball and all the stuff that the neighborhood kids were doing. So when I got in the Navy, I think I was the only person that got in the Navy didn't know how to swim because, you know, swimming was play, you know.
Yeah.
But I almost got booted out of the Navy because I couldn't swim, and I had to stay an extra month at officer candidate school because I didn't swim and had to be instructed how to swim.
Especially when you join the Navy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Water seems to be a bit of a job lock.
Yeah.
Were you a pilot as well?
I took lessons. I never soloed, but I had 15 hours of flying, so
wow.
lesson.
So when did you enlist in the military, and when did that happen?
68, I think I left in 69. That was a desperation thing because I was in college and I kept getting deferments. And I had 6 weeks to go in college. I got my final induction notice to the Army. And I had this dreaded fear about, you know, being in a wet, dirty foxhole.
Yeah.
You know, and so I had taken the test for officer candidate school, never heard from them. So when I got that induction notice, I called them up and said, hey, you know, I took the test and applied, you know, several months ago and never heard back from. She said, we've been looking for you for 6 months, but you know, you're gonna have to go through it all again unless you're sworn in by Monday. So Diane and I took, you know, drive 200 miles down to Omaha to get sworn in through a blizzard, snowstorm, and got sworn in, and then we sat around home for a year waiting for the class to open up. A year for the class to open up. So finally went in 69, I guess it was.
Was that considered? That was a very noble thing to do, joining the military, wasn't it?
I don't know. It was kind of a thing that I was going to do from the time that I used to hang out at the airport. I was going to be in the Air Force. And then I think when I was 10 years old, found out I needed glasses, and my goal was to be an Air Force pilot. And you had to have 20/20 uncorrected vision. So, you know, it kind of pierced my dream. So what's next best thing? So
yeah. So you served in Vietnam?
Yes, 3 years. Yeah.
What was that like, Jim?
It was different. I mean, you were scared to begin with, but you know, it's kind of like a survival thing, you know, because we were in the rivers, and you know, you had to be alert, and you slept with a 45 pistol next to you because they worried about sappers coming in. And what they did on that particular boat was you moved every day. You never sat in one spot and so you threw the concussion grenades like every 5 minutes in the water, keeps swimmers from approaching the ship. And I remember the first day on there, I thought, this is going to be a year and zero sleep, because no way you're going to sleep through this. Well, the third day on there, you know, after being up 24 or 48 hours, you sleep through anything.
So Vietnam as well as what other places did you serve?
it's funny how the Navy works. The reason I ended up in Vietnam was kind of my own ignorance. The way the Navy works, recruiters, they found out I grew up three blocks away from the Sioux River. Said, "Well, we got a job for you." Well, their idea of a river was Vietnam, so that's off there. I went for 3 years, but
Wow.
you had to be careful what you said. And then from there, after I got done with the gunboats, then I got orders to Savannah, Georgia, as an instructor, NROTC instructor at Savannah State in Georgia, which is an all-black college. And I told them, I said, listen, I've never been south of St. Louis. It's always, well, they said, well, we got a job for you. And we'd given away all our winter clothes because we were in state home port in Guam. No winter clothes. So they sent us to Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Ooh. Chilly.
As a minority officer recruiter. And as soon as I got there, they did away with that job and made me nuclear recruiter. So I'm sitting there saying, I didn't even know how to spell nuclear at the time, but here you are. So, but as it worked out, you kind of stumble into dumb things. I recruited. The goal for nuclear officer recruiters was 3 a year, and I recruited 6 in the first year. So I was golden, for the tour.
But you wouldn't be able to just give that job to anyone, right? That was...
Well, no, I guess they just kind of looked at it like, if you had, serious enough to, and all you had for nuclear power, all you had to sell them is a free trip to Washington, D.C. for an interview, which was a
pretty easy sell.
Yeah.
So you said gunboats, just really casually then. Tell me about the gunboats you served on.
Well, it was 165 foot long, 25 foot wide. But the thing that was impressive, it had a jet engine, 2 diesels and a jet engine. So you could do 40 knots. But most of the time you're running around on the diesels, the V12 diesels. And I went as chief engineer. Most of my jobs were, my subspecialty was engineering. So most of my jobs were geared around engineering and maintenance and so on. So I one of the few that I was chief engineer on diesel ships, steamship, and gas turbine ships. So not too many people have ever been served in all those. You usually kind of specialize in either diesel, steam, or
gas. Did you see a fair bit of action, a bit of combat with the gunboats then?
Yeah, but like I said, most of the time you were running from the South Vietnamese and didn't worry too much about the North Vietnamese. But and most of the stuff you never saw them. You'd fire at just a location. You get a radio with a position or something, and you'd fire. We had 3-inch guns, and you'd go in the river and fire at a certain location, and then hightail it out of the river.
But sailing down the river, you were almost a sitting duck if you didn't.
Well, that was the whole thing, because they would float mines down on the stuff.
How's your working day, Justin, compared to this?
Pretty simple.
You've gone down rivers and looking for mines, and that's incredible to me. That had to be scary.
Well, it was. You were just on edge all the time, when you were there. But after a while, it just kind of became the norm, so you didn't.
The Vietnam War in Australia, it's a very conflicting thing even to this day. Veterans now are finally starting to be appreciated for what they went through. Was it like that in America too, Jim, where you came back from Vietnam? It was almost like the forgotten war. People didn't want to be a part of it.
Well, it was almost, I don't know what they experienced, but it was probably worse for us. But, coming back, I mentioned I was a recruiter in Minneapolis, and the University of Minnesota was across the river from us. So that was kind of a frequent stop.
Yeah.
But when we came back, you couldn't wear your uniform on campus. You couldn't drive your Navy vehicle on campus. You had to go over there and try to sell the Navy, something that they were ashamed of having you there. But you're trying to sell them. So.
Wow. So there was some hostility from just the people,
very,
right?
Very hostile. And, one of the things, I got to tell you a story about the nuclear power officer recruiting, that we were driving back from Eau Claire, Wisconsin to Minneapolis. We saw this kid hitchhiking back to Minneapolis. and just start talking. And I asked him, you know, well, what are you majoring in? He was a college kid at Wisconsin, whatever the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. And he said he was a chemical engineering student. He was a senior. And my eyes lit up and my ears, you know, figured that's prime prospect
Yeah.
for nuclear power.
Yeah.
So I had him come over to the house on Saturday, gave him the test, he passed it, sold him on the trip to Washington, D.C. And that was my first successful recruit. So I started looking for all the hitchhikers between Minneapolis, Eau Claire. So,
Wow. So you eventually, through your many years of the military, you ended up as a commander on battleships in the Navy. That is, can I ask you, was that an unusual thing for a black man to be a commander of a battleship? Was that something that you found a lot or not very much?
Well, I'm not sure which part you're talking about. To be a black man, one was unusual for even being an officer in the Navy, let alone in charge of anything. But yeah, I mean, you really don't think about it. You know, the amount of responsibility that's dumped on you is just overwhelming. You know, if you just grew up and, you know, take the typical job at home. Like, for example, when I first went to the first ship I was on, I was walked down to the engine room and said, "You're responsible for these engines." And this engine is bigger than my house at the time. You know, each one of them was bigger than the house. But you're in charge. You're responsible. That thing starts every time because we had to move often. If it doesn't start, you know, you're going to be on your way back to home or back to the Army or someplace you're not going to be in. And so you took it pretty seriously. You know.
Yeah. So Doug toured Australia in 2020, 6 years ago. I'm pretty sure he started COVID down there, Justin. I'm just going to say, because it happened right at the same time, didn't it? Right. Remember we were leaving and it's like, oh, what's this COVID thing? Yeah. So pretty well, Doug went to Australia in 2020, but you must have been like, big deal. Because how many times had you been to Australia well before then with the military?
Yeah, 5 or 6. But yeah, it was kind of a common thing. Was, in fact, you know, you had mentioned the camaraderie between the Australians and Americans. I didn't find that. You know, we had pair up with the Australian gunboats.
Yep.
And, you know, in a port, and it would turn into kind of a boasting contest about we're better than you. You know.
Yep.
Our people, and they consider, I guess, the British being them, that we invented radar, and without radar, you never would have won a war, you know, or it was just back and forth. So it was kind of contentious whenever you're together with them.
So Doug always told us that kangaroos are fake news because he never saw any, but he would never get out of the bus, would he, at the wildlife places because he was too scared of snakes. So I'd say that is part of the reason why. Now, a couple pictures of you here. I want to show people these pictures because you have a very much a Samuel L. Jackson vibe going here. I got to tell you, this one here as well. And you were just telling me that just the other day or just recently or at some point, there was a young kid that wanted your autograph, right?
Yeah, we were at Walmart. I think it was... Subway sandwich. They had a little store in there, and I'm sitting there eating, and I could see over the side of this. You know, when somebody's staring at you, you kind of feel it. And there were like 5 or 6 of them behind the counter just staring at me. And finally, one of them came over, and he's got a pad in his hand, and he says, "Mr. Jackson, could I get your autograph?" And you know, I thought it kind of went through my mind to just go ahead and sign the thing, you know, because I knew it was called, but I didn't. I let it go.
So, Justin, I talked to your cousins about, you know, Uncle Jim, as it was back then, and they all said that when he came in the house, you knew you had to straighten up. Is that how you saw that? Or was he a softie?
He was always good to me. They were older and more ornery than I was.
But he certainly has an aura of respect about him.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was always neat that he was so high up in the Navy that we thought that was cool.
So which battleships and ships did you serve on, Jim? Like, was it Kitty Hawk? Was that one you mentioned, Justin? You felt like it was that one of them?
Yeah, Kitty Hawk. on the staff, carrier group staff, we actually had 3 aircraft carriers: the Kitty Hawk, the Constellation, and the Ranger. And we would deploy with whoever was doing the workup. You know, because you work up, you know, like 3 or 4 months practicing what you're going to do when you deploy. So you'd be on one ship, and then you'd work that all the way through that, then go out to deployment for 6 months and come back, and you go on another carrier, work that up, and go through the same routine. And so I was the staff. I was a logistics and engineering logistics material officer. So I was responsible for all the fuel for the battle group. And the battle group consisted of 13 ships, you know, 1 or 2 submarines, and then destroyers and cruisers besides the carrier. So you're responsible for all the food and fuel and scheduling the underway replenishments and formations that you're in for replenishments. And then they had what they call airheads. We spent most of our time where the battle's going on, just south of the Straits of Hormuz they're talking about now.
Oh.
That's where we spent our whole deployment.
Wow.
Practicing what they're doing now. We did practicing, you know, flying in the opposite direction, the same distance that you fly into Iran. We did that for 6 months at a time. And so I was responsible for making sure everything was there. If there were parts for the aircraft or parts for the ship, was my job, and getting them there. So every week you had they call them airheads. They flew into Masira Island, a cargo plane, with parts, and if there was some emergent or special food supply, whatever, would fly in, and then the helicopters would fly off the carriers or the support ships in there, pick the materials up, come out, and then you do an underway replenishment with the carrier and the other destroyers. So that's what my job entailed, is on the staff.
So what kind of jets were landing on the aircraft carriers? What era was that?
Well, we did the Constellation. When I was on the Constellation, we did the first workup for the F-18 that's flying now. We were the initial deployed with the first of any coast for the Navy. But it was F-14s and A-6s and...
What an experience to see those things land and take off each day.
It was fascinating. I mean, I don't know a person, I've never met a person that didn't just stand and watch this operation just in awe.
Yeah.
And when you realize these kids are only 17, 18 years old that are out there doing that stuff, and, you know, they're within, you know, a second of ending their life, you know, just one bad move, one mistake, and they're over the side, and you're in the search mode looking for them, because you just turn the wrong direction when a jet's turning in front of them, and you're overboard. So it's a dangerous place.
You said there was a banter amongst the pilots, you know, that they would almost joke, hey, you better come back, you know, like, because the enormity of possibly dying when they left the ship was real, right?
Yeah, they're a different breed. And I'm not sure what it is, if it's the psychological thing, but, you know, to me, versus the regular surface Navy, which I was at, they acted more like a fraternity. You know, it was always, you know, banter back and forth about, you know, they'd go off a mission and say, you know, do I get your stereo if you don't come back, or do I get your boombox if you don't? And that's kind of banter they
to lighten the situation a bit,
right? And I tell you, one of the things that this is involved my wife, the first time she was ever exposed to it. They have what they call like a dining in for officers.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a little show. It's actually a traditional thing from the British Navy, where, you know, they do a leg of beef.
Yep.
And go through this big ceremony where they bring the beef out for the admiral to sample, and he either rejects it, or it normally has a little show. He pulls out a gun and shoots the cook if it isn't up to the meeting. But these pilots, now they're sitting there wearing white uniform, full dinner dress white uniform, and they got the little salad tomatoes they're stocking and putting them in their napkins and stuff at the table. At the end of this whole thing, they start throwing these
They had a food fight?
yeah, these tomatoes back and forth. And I look around and my wife says, "No, you aren't going to do that." And she's, "No, you're not going to do that." These guys, there were tomatoes flying all over the room, and everybody sitting there with, this tomato juice running down their white uniforms and stuff. But she was amazed. But that's how these pilots are compared to, they're just loose and because those guys are dangerous. It's not a matter of what condition you're in as far as war or not. You can go off the end of that carrier and it's all over with. And it doesn't matter if you got, people shooting at your bombs or whatever. Your life is.
Did you ever see that happen, Jim? Did you ever see planes go off the edge?
No, not.
Oh, that's good.
No.
Wow. Down here's a couple cool pictures. Can you grab that one on top just there, this one here, and tell me who that is, and tell me why that's relevant to your life. So who's that? Is it Bill Hill?
I get a little choked up. Yeah, this is.
Wow. Okay.
He's a special person to me, but yeah, maybe take a little break.
Okay.
Please.
Jim, obviously Bill Hill means a lot to you, even to this day. He was a huge part of your passion for racing, right?
Yeah, he came along at a time when I was into the stock cars, for building stock cars, and they were basically tanks. Because you just used no metal was thinner than 1/4 inch, and it went up from there. But they were sleds, and he used to laugh and call them
stagecoaches
because they were so high.
Yep.
And he's the one that taught me about the step frames, how to drop cars and torsion bars and stuff. And so I started building, based on his information, building cars for people. And the last one I built was for Jimmy Matthews, and he won the championship in that car in 1970. And after that, I'd look at pictures, and every car out there looked just like that car I built. And
what did you call your cars? Were they called Clark cars or anything like that? Would you have a name for it? That's a Jim Clark car.
Yeah. Just build them and got very little credit for them.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of the people never knew that I built them, because we built them down in a junkyard. And in fact, we should go for a ride later, and I'll show you where all this stuff took place. But his race car was in a junkyard, truck salvage yard down by the falls. And so when I started building cars, they had a little shop up on the top, and that's where I built cars for Roger Larson and Jimmy Matthews and so on. But it was all based off of stuff that I learned from Bill. And he was the kind of guy that when you never wanted him to beat you, because he would come over, he'd show up at your race shop on Monday with a 6-pack of beer under one hand and a right rear tire under the other hand. He said, "This is how I beat you," and he'd give you the tire and challenge you to beat him with using his stuff. And then he'd sit there and drink beer and giggle and get in his car, and away he'd go. But he was just free with his information and knowledge.
Really?
It didn't matter who it was, he'd tell you what to do, go ahead and beat me. And that's what kind of guy he was. But in getting to Douglas,
Douglas, I still love hearing that.
They started up Hartford Speedway, and I was talking about the sprint car thing, at Huset Speedway, mentioning the word sprint car, you'd be banned for a week if you even mentioned a tail or a sprint car. And so Bill came around here, and everybody started getting the bug for sprint cars, because he talked about them all the time. And in fact, we built a modified, and I think the first car at Sioux Falls that ever ran Knoxville in a modified, and won the first heat race. 3 carburetors on a Chevy. The engine was most of the engine was mine. I owned the crane heads.
No way.
Bill owned the short block. Another guy owned the rear end. Another guy owned the headers. And we put it all together and went down there. It wasn't even painted. It was primered with masking tape numbers on it. And he went out and won the first heat race. And he comes in and the motor's just screaming. And he's yelling. And Bill talked so fast you couldn't understand him anyway when he talked. But he's just screaming and yelling. I said, Bill, settle down. What's the problem? What's the problem? And he came out, every sentence that he ever spoke, where the first 4 words were expletives. You know, SOB, that, yeah. And then you get down and that's when my 7th grade English kicked in, you know, that I learned how to diagram sentence, you know, so you listen for a subject, noun, and a verb. So the 5th thing you listed to after the expletives was a subject. He came back from the, came in the pits, just screaming. The SOB throttle stuck on the car when I started. And so he ran the whole heat race with the throttle stuck wide open. They came in and started chewing. But Bill was a character. We built a sprint car, Edmund sprint car, and went over he raced a modified at Jackson, and then we went up to Owatonna, and Diane was with me. And the owner, the story was he was going to drop the modified in Jackson and then come up with his pickup with the fuel and the tools and everything, tires, up to Owatonna, which is on the other side up by south of Minneapolis. And so we get up there, and this guy's name was Adrian, never showed up. He decided to go down to Lake Okoboji instead of coming up to the racetrack. So we're up there in this sprint car, no fuel, no tools, no nothing. Bill goes to the driver's meeting and comes back, and he's stuttering. He's smoke coming out of his ears. And he says, you know, the subject were the drivers. You know, they had voted that we couldn't run because we had 4-point roll bars, roll cage. And back, the IMCA just had the little suicide rack over the back of the driver's head. And so he comes back. Well, a normal driver would have just said, okay, load it up, we're going home. You know, Bill Hill wasn't a driver, he was a racer. And the verb in the sentence was hacksaw. You know, and I knew what he was talking about. So here we are with a hacksaw cutting off the roll cage off the car. And he went racing, and blew the engine up in the heat race. But that was Bill. He was 100% racer, and he had only one thing: he win or go home. That was his attitude.
He pissed off Doug Wolfgang.
Well, you know that went back to the time that we were down at Knoxville, that modified.
Yep.
Wolfgang, I think he was driving number 4 Speedway Motors car for I forget what his name is.
Speedy Bill, probably.
Yeah, Bill Smith. And Wolfgang came out, stepped on it, and he was on 2 wheels coming out of 4. And Bill says, that guy isn't going to live through the season. Well, you know where he went, where Wolfgang went.
Turned out pretty good.
Yeah, and I know Wolfgang mentioned that there were certain people that he kind of held a grudge for, and I know who one of them is. So.
Yeah, that Wolfgang guy turned out. He turned out all right. I love this picture here of him and of the Dougs, and I also love the fact you look carefully. That's Danny Schatz' business on there as well. The Schatz Crossroad and Truck Stop in Minot, North Dakota.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, I think he's driving the 4 car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So racing wasn't just Doug's passion; it was yours too.
Oh yeah, long before. You know, I grew up working in a welding shop in North Indiana. It's a half a block away from where we lived, and all the cars. The guy who owned the welding shop was kind of a sponsor, and he went out there and donated his services to the racetrack. You know, he had volunteered me to go out and weld a plating on the track, and then he'd get the credit for it. And but it was fun for me and most of the car owners then would bring their cars over to the welding shop, if they crashed or whatever, or we'd build complete cars, and that's all we did. So I had measurements memorized as far as Nerf bars and bumpers and so on. So that's kind of how we went for a few years. I think I learned to weld at 10 years old, and so I was all the way through high school kind of hung out at the racetrack.
So Doug always talked about Daryl Dolly.
Yeah, he was a class act. Daryl was you had to know him to appreciate him. He was man of few words, and the words that came out were usually just a one word phrase or something, and it kind of summed up his attitude about whatever the situation was. But his favorite word was trick. He'd come over for dinner, and my wife would make these potatoes, I don't know whether twice baked potatoes or something. He called them trick potatoes. Everything was trick or this or that. And so when he was racing Knox, he would race Knoxville on Saturday, and he'd come up to Minneapolis when we were stationed there. And he and his wife and Richie Giordoni would stay at our place, and then we'd go up to North Star on Sunday. But just one of those just super nice guys. But if you walked into a shop, and you walked back to look at his car, he'd call you an idler. You didn't have anything better to do but idle around and look at the shops. But he was a character.
And he was a huge influence on Doug.
Yeah, and the whole thing with that was going to mention the Hartford Speedway. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but he was instrumental in starting up Hartford Speedway. And my best man was one of the money people. And there were like 4 or 5 people that I kind of worked for, or friends with, that because of the attitude of the people in Huset about sprint cars, they basically started up that track out there. So Douglas came along and he wanted to volunteer to be a flagman, and I was discouraged. I said, it's just a position, job. Really.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, and they hired him. And I said, the only reason they hired you is because the guardrail around the flag stand is only 4 foot tall. You're the only guy there that didn't have to duck to avoid flying debris because of that didn't set well with him.
No.
But yet I used to kind of jab him all the time about.
Yeah, you said right from an early age he wanted to be a star.
Oh yeah, and he was encouraged, I think, by the same thing. Wolfgang, Wolfgang says, "Doug, you stick with me, and you'll be a star someday. Just stick with me."
Yeah.
And that's kind of the attitude they went through the whole thing together. That they were like a two-man show, and I think Douglas thought he was as good. He could jump in that car and do just as well as Wolfgang. So.
And Wolfgang has a very different view of that. That he wasn't a driver and he wasn't a mechanic either. So the flag waver thing was about where he was supposed to end up, I feel.
But yeah, Douglas had the flair, and like I was saying, he's a lot like my brother. It's just to put a little showmanship into the process. And
yeah, you talked about Doug, becoming a prominent flag waver in the industry, and you being in that mechanical side of things, but he started to grow a profile, which he enjoyed. And when you look at it towards the end, he was the most recognized flagman in the world of sprint car racing. Kind of cool. Wow, just a kid from South Dakota, right?
Yeah. One of the things that a lot of people probably didn't know, but he only had one eye.
Yeah.
And there's different stories kind of sidetracking what you're saying, but it just came to my mind that I always felt responsible for that because, I had built a car for Harold Petrie for Jackson.
Yeah.
And finally got it done. And they were in a race that Saturday. And I had to go to the state track meet in Mitchell, and I worked late on the car and missed the bus, the school, high school bus to Mitchell. And so it was on the finals. It was the second day of the track meet, so the finals. And so I borrowed the boss's car. He had driven it to work. I went down there and took his pickup down there, borrowed his car. I was driving and blew the rods out of the car on the way to Mitchell. So there goes the state championship. And so Douglas wanted to go to Jackson, to see the car run. And I told him he couldn't go because I had to bum a ride myself. Because, that car was gone. So I bummed a ride with Jimmy Matthews and Jay Agee and his Joe Matthews over to Jackson, because the car and team had already left. And so that day is the day that he stayed. He was working for Pete the welder, the guy that I was building cars for. And they had him, I guess, digging up some rose bushes or whatever, and the handle broke on it and lost his eye. And I had a gill complex up until about 2 years ago.
Really?
About, if I'd only made arrangements for him to go. And
that's a lot to carry.
Yeah. And so 2 years ago I had eye surgery. And first one is for cataracts, but they replaced the lens. First one went flawless. I was back to normal the next day. Second one I go in and the guy gets the lens off and goes to replace the new one. And he said, uh-oh. And that's his exact comment. He's standing over with the scalpel, say, uh-oh. And so I thought, his bedside manner needs some improvement. But anyway, they had the lens out, and they just patched the eye, and they had to order a special lens to replace it. So I had to live for 2 weeks with one eye. And Diane was driving me around, and we were coming back from Watertown, and I'm in the driver's seat, and we're doing 65 around this curb, and I saw this car pull out on the curb out from the traffic line to turn, and I saw him pull out, and I told her, I said, that car is gonna be in your lane when you get down there. And we're doing 65 and got so close, she'd have slammed on the brake, we'd have slid right through the car. But she says, ditch, and she drove down the ditch, and this car stayed upright. If we'd had a small car, we'd have still been rolling.
Wow.
But anyway, I was, about time and place. I was talking to Doug, and I says, and I had forgotten who I was talking to, and I says, it's amazing how one eye compensates for the other when you got a bad eye. And he said, oh, really?
Really?
But yeah, that kind of, all that consternation I'd gone through, worrying about being responsible for it, just kind of went out the window from that one comment.
You have his laugh as well. Justin has his laugh. His laugh is so iconic. I find that everyone has taken on, particularly in the last few weeks since he passed, it seems to be a real sense of joy for people, that laugh. And you must have heard that your whole life.
I never paid that much attention to it. And I don't know where you got it from, because my father never laughed.
Okay.
Very seldom smiled, but I never heard it. Father did. I was going to bring a picture of my father. He could be an identical twin to Douglas.
Grab the book. Yeah. There's that picture of him in the church, I think, where, when he was a deacon, and I can see Doug so clearly in that.
Yeah. I'll tell you, one time we came back to Knoxville, and we came back, we were going to meet Douglas outside the grandstand, and Diane and I are sitting there. And again, how you your mind's somewhere else or concentrating on something else. And I saw this guy walking across the parking lot, and I said, that guy looks just like Luther. And they had a straw hat on, and I said, that guy looks like my father. And then I realized, that's Douglas. And they could be identical twins at that age.
Yeah, this one in particular blows my mind. That one, that's Luther. That's your dad just there. And how about those socks? That's a wild-looking group of operators right there. You said something. You said a number of things that were really profound, Jim, at the service we had at Huset's. The one that struck a chord with everybody was when you referenced Martin Luther King when you were listening to the speech on television. Can you recall that story?
Yeah. In fact, kind of what brought it up, and then I think I preceded that with the way I was treated at Huset's when I first started racing. And they had a guy, and I remember his name to this day, and he's in the Huset's Hall of Fame. And he almost had his personal attitude or position was he was going to be the Negro compliance officer. And since I was the only Negro, he would kind of single me out. First I was too young to get in the pits. Then it was, well, you're don't have white pants and white shirt, one or the other. And then it was various reasons to keep me out of the pits. And reason for it, I was with the 39 car, but they had a full crew, and I was a fabricator, so I would just latch onto them or get on with another team to get in the pits, because you could only have 3 people with the driver. And so this guy would kind of single me out, and I could feel it. When somebody has it out for you, you could feel it, and so just kind of let it go. And then the guy probably I admire a little more than Bill was a guy named Dewey Dirksen, and he walked up to Fred Buckmiller, who was the head guy at Huset Speedway, and told him, he says, and they had the championship car the year before and previous years, and told him that guy built this car. He's just as important or more important than I am, and he either gets in or he's treated fairly here, or this car and myself never comes back here. And that's when things changed. And remembering all that, when I heard Martin Luther King say that someday, he has a dream that his children will be judged based on their character and not their color of their skin. And I thought, it's kind of sarcastically, fat chance, Martin. That's never going to happen. But the outpouring that I've seen in the last month or 3 weeks for Doug, it had really touched me, especially the way they went all the way down in Knoxville. They had everybody lined up, and they spent out 45 minutes to an hour honoring Doug, the flagman. Yeah. And I'd never seen that. I've seen, drivers that passed away, track owners, managers. None of them got the treatment that Doug did. And it was all based on his job and his character. And, I was thinking, listening to some of the speeches, that there's a lot of character to judge there. Doug had a bunch of characters, so a lot to go around. But the thing I look at is that he'd be the happiest guy in the world if he could sit there and see all the admiration that's going out toward him, because that was kind of his goal and his thing. So
kind of became a star.
Yeah,
that's just what he wanted, right?
Yeah.
You must feel incredibly proud of your little brother, that he went on to become that happy person that he always wanted to be with that role.
Well, it is, because he got what he set out for, and I'm not only proud of him, but the nieces and nephews, and I don't know if Natalie was at the last ceremony. That little girl, I call her a little girl, but she owns like 3 different Orange Theory units out in California, and her husband manages one. Couple sons manage the other, and she's got a doctor's degree in kinesiology, And I mean, she's just a superstar, you know. And to me, she's still a 12-year-old little skinny girl on roller skates, you know, that we used to go visit. And Brian is a, you know, real estate developer, and Justin, he's you know, I think about him all the time. I used to do what Justin did. I used to be a heavy equipment mechanic and a diesel mechanic, and spent a lot of time out on the reservation, you know, out there servicing rental equipment for the company that I worked for. And these guys treated me like royalty, this company. I mean, they're just super nice. They, you know, we didn't dine. I didn't have a honeymoon, but the owner of this company let me work out in a facility out in Rapid City.
Yeah.
And I had to work from, you know, 8 o'clock to 10 or whatever, and then tour the Black Hills the rest of the time. And so I had a special place in my heart for that guy. He passed away recently, so kind of impacts me. So
there's a lot of people who seem that have been kind to you over the years that have been a big impact on your life, Jim.
I can name 5 of them that off the top that just changed my life around. You know, he's one of them. And this guy, Bill, Davey Engelbretson, and I don't know if you've heard of him or know him, but he was a big sprint car guy the only one out of Sioux Falls that ever accomplished anything or got anywhere. But, you know, when I was building a race car, and I was going to college, and I would start the cars down at college. I rented a garage down. I would start the frame and chassis, and then haul them up here to get the roll cages bent and stuff. And used to build them down by the falls here in Sioux Falls. And Davey would come in lunch hour. You know, he was an executive for a company here in Sioux Falls. Come in with his business suit on, and look at the car, and he'd say, well, how much you get for this? And I said, well, 10% of the winnings. And he looked at me and he says, you know, 10% of nothing is nothing. And that little phrase stuck in my mind, because I was considering quitting college and just building race cars for a living, because, you know, it's fun and making money was rolling in. They had car owners, you know, beg me to build cars. And but that 10% of nothing is nothing just hit me, because I remember all the times that you lose and you're sitting there trying to. And Roger's another story. It's class Roger Larson. The guy was like a guy that could pull money out of the air, and he would have, you know, 10 girlfriends, and if he needed a right rear tire, he would go to this girlfriend and he'd come back with a right rear tire. If he needed whatever part it was for the car, he had a girlfriend that would fund it. But
might have been a little bit like his mate Doug.
But he was a class guy, and you know his sister lives. We live up at a lake north of here, and his sister lives at the lake, and we get together once in a while, or whenever we get together, we tell Roger stories, because of the stuff that he pulled. You know, he was his job was to sell hearing aids. You know, he would take off for out to western South Dakota or wherever, and sell hearing aids. And if he had an ex-wife, if he had a bad week on the road, then all of a sudden he fell back in love with his ex-wife, and we were able to race for another week. You know, so that's how that operation went.
That's a smooth operator.
And there was another guy. My high school track coach was another one. I wasn't even going to go to college. I was walking down Phillips Avenue in Sioux Falls, and the coach says, "Oh, Jim, where are you going to college?" And I said, "I'm not going anywhere." I said, "I'm making pretty good money building race cars." He says, "BS." He said, "You be here and talk to this guy Monday morning." It was August. Monday morning, this coach at Springfield, Monday morning. And it was almost like an order, you know.
Yep.
I wasn't used to taking orders, but it was so okay. So I got down there and talked to the guy. Gave me a scholarship for playing football, and 5.5 years later, graduated from college. But that guy, if I hadn't run into that guy, it'd been a different situation, different story. But between this Dewey Dirksen that straightened the Huset thing out, Bill, that I learned everything about race cars, and that coach, the three of the people that just kind of intersected with my life at the right time to. But
sometimes all people need is someone to believe in them, Jim.
yeah, that's it. You know, and another thing I was going to mention, I'm just rattling on here. When I was in 6th grade, and this is motivated.
You'd be used to this, Diane, when you're this. I'm just getting the feeling you're like, yeah, here he goes.
Sixth grade, and I thought, you know, I'm like everybody else, and had a teacher that lived in South Sioux Falls, and she must have been well-to-do, but basically told the class, you know, you kids from the east side aren't gonna amount to much. So you learn a trade and learn how to do something to even have a chance in life. And boy, that hit me between the eyes, because here my sister, that same year, got a scholarship to, it's called Presentation School of Nursing up in Aberdeen, 4-year scholarship to be a nurse. And she was a registered nurse, and she got straight A's in high school. And to me, that was kind of the height.
Yeah.
I wasn't that great a student, but my sister said, you know, she can do it, I can do it, and that kind of motivated me and got me going. And I remember, you know, you talking about influence. My grandmother and my sister would bring the report card home, and you know, she'd get a quarter. She had good grade, and took her report card over, and she had all A's and 1 B. And my grandmother says, "What's this? You know, what happened here?" And you know, you're not getting $1; you're going to get a quarter because you didn't get straight A's.
Wow.
And it just devastated my sister. So she went back to school and just studied hard and got straight A's. And come to find out, after a few years, my grandmother couldn't even read. She didn't know an A from a B. But she's
wow! just looked different to the A.
Yeah, it's different than the others.
Wow. I'm really grateful to meet you, and also to you too, Diane, and thank you. I'm pretty grateful to meet this guy as well, because he's like a brother to me. But thank you for speaking at Huset's. I'm really glad that you and I talked just before it, and I asked you, would you do that, because your speech was profound, as it is today. And I'm really glad that we got to talk about this lunatic a little bit here as well. I mean, when you look at that smile, and now all I can hear is, really? Yeah. When you said that bit about the eye. I never realized that one eye had to compensate for the other. Yeah. So there's that laugh in the background.
There was another thing that he used to do too, you know, after he got his eye. And then he would take, when you go out with him, he would take his eye and put it in a drink. And here's looking at you, kid, you know, kind of thing. And but that was Doug. He had his flaws, though. It was a long ways from being a perfect.
No, we knew that, but we loved him anyway.
Yeah.
He was what we would call in Australia a rough diamond.
Yeah.
It's great to see you again, Jim. Thank you so much for sharing today.
Yeah. Sorry to rattle on, but
no, I love it. It's all amazing. I knew it would be. It's a privilege to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah.
How good
You're
is
welcome.
that?